Okay, welcome back everybody. I think we're now up and running. The technology is working and we are fully recording. Following my opening announcement, I'm now going to give the council an opportunity, if it so wishes, is there anything procedurally or administratively it wishes to update me on, bearing in mind we've had a bit of time between the end of stage one and now the stage two hearings. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Nothing necessarily procedurally or administratively, but just on behalf of the council, can we thank you for reconvening the hearings into the local plan, and to thank yourself and the programme officer for the guidance and the work you've done with us between the stage one hearings and now. We would also like to thank all of the parties that took part in stage one, those that are here today as well as those scheduled to participate in this stage over the coming weeks. The council would also like to thank the promoters for Heathlands, Lidsing and Invicta Barrack schemes for the work they've done in preparing additional transport evidence to support their project, and indeed the whole plan. And equally, we would like to express our gratitude to colleagues at Kent County Council and National Highways for the work they've done with Maidstone and the respective promoters in preparing this additional work. We're also very grateful to those third parties who have taken time to respond to this additional evidence. So the council is very pleased that, obviously subject to required main modifications, you have determined that the spatial strategy which underpins the plan can be made sound. As I believe I said in the opening of the examination in September of last year, the council does not underestimate the concerns of some of Maidstone's communities around the spatial strategy, but as we know, the issue of growth at the scale which Maidstone must accommodate it is emotive and is very seldom without controversy. Nonetheless, the council does believe firmly that this is the best strategy for the borough going forward, and that the manner in which it will be delivered and will provide much needed new infrastructure will enable us to work with communities to manage impacts and maximise benefits. As you know, sir, following your interim letter to the council, we accept the necessity for the modification which removes the proposal for a safeguarded area in the Leeds-Langley corridor. Nonetheless, it remains the council's intention to continue work on this project with a view to the next local plan, as we believe that Leeds-Langley very much has the scope to remain consistent with the sort of infrastructure first philosophy which has guided this strategy. For this reason, the council will request your guidance during the hearings on how best to provide a hook within the local plan to provide for the eventuality that this work may need to come forward in advance of the next local plan. Finally, sir, given the difference in the nature and technical detail required for some of this stage, you'll no doubt be pleased to hear that you'll be hearing much less from Mr. Edgerton and myself. We'll be involving the principal planning officers much more. And for today's session, can I please introduce Ms. Smith, who is a principal planning officer in the spatial planning team, and Mr. Mackey, who is a leader for the major projects team in the council. So thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. So I've made a note, Mr. Coyne, of your request to look again in terms of the Leeds-Langley issue. Obviously, it doesn't form part of my programme for the stage two hearings, whether we sort of look at something as part of, we've got an administrative, also sort of next steps, sort of final session on the last day, whether we look at something as part of that that discussion. But I've made a note of it, and no doubt we'll come back to that in due course. Obviously, people are here today this morning, as I indicated earlier, in relation to the policy, the approach to various sites, within Maidstone town centre, and indeed the overarching strategic policy for the town centre, and then we'll move on to the urban area, the wider Maidstone urban area. As indicated, what I'd like to do for the purpose of this recording is to just briefly go round the table for people to introduce themselves to me in terms of who you are and who you are representing. I've obviously heard already this morning from Mr. Coyne, but again, if the council's team could just start with their introductions first. Thank you.
Yes, morning, sir. I'm Megan Thomas, Miss Thomas, King's Council, promoting the plan for the planning department. Thank you.
Phil Coyne's interim director for the local plan review at Maidstone.
Mark Edgerton, strategic planning manager at Maidstone.
Good morning, sir. Helen Smith, Principal Planning Officer for Maidstone Borough Council.
Good morning, sir. Austin Mackey, Major Projects Team Leader, currently seconded from Development Management to Spatial Policy.
Thank you. I can then move round to those seated on my left, please.
David Mosley from Countryside Properties.
Good morning, Joshua Meller from Barton Wilmore, now Stantec, here on behalf of Police and Land.
Good morning, it's Julie Davis from CPRE Kent, the Countryside Charity.
Good morning, Hamish Buttle from Terence Butler Holdings, relating to Power Hub and Baltic Wharf.
Thank you, everybody. So hopefully people have seen my agenda. I've read the various statements that were provided in relation to this matter. And in terms of where I'd like to start with the agenda is in terms of policy LPR SP1, Maidstone Town Centre. Obviously this reflects that Maidstone urban area is identified, I think, in the first tier of the spatial strategy. It is a focus for development. And I understand the council, against this, the council has produced or published town centre opportunity guidance back in 2019 in relation to 5 key, or what it considers are 5 kind of key sites, shown at figure 2.1 of the plan, all of which are proposed for allocation, and the intention is to produce a town centre strategy through to 2050. Obviously, policy SPR1 is in 3 parts. I guess my sort of first question for the council in terms of policy LPRS1 is whether its overall approach and ambition for the town centre, in particular the proposed number of new homes, is sound and ultimately deliverable. Whether as part of that the council could just briefly touch upon the proposed main modifications in terms of some of the site capacities and why that they may need to change for plan soundness. Is it Mr. Edgerton first?
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, as you note, it is considered to be the most sustainable part of Maidstone Borough and top of the settlement hierarchy set out within the plan. We're doing the very best we can, sir, to deliver within the town centre approximately 2,500 units being brought forward, which is approximately 50% of the amount of development proposed in recent this 2017 plan and in the local plan review as well, and that's set out in our response to MIQ 2.3. The facilities, services and infrastructure is already in place, including shops, offices and obviously transport, including rail infrastructure. And you've referred to the opportunity area guidance, which focuses on key sites, and that being produced by Savills. What this also enables the council to do is to focus development onto previously developed land, per paragraph 119 of the MPPF, in and around the town centre. And what we would like to do is to bring forward sufficient developments to create momentum so that land values are such that we can bring forward affordable housing within the town centre. There are viability issues there, so and we hope to overcome them. You've mentioned the town centre strategy, sir, which is being brought forward by We Made That Consultants on behalf of the local authority. And that illustrates our commitment to future planning and coordination, instigating renewal and master planning of key areas. It deals with the process of moving from regeneration in the town centre through to renaissance, and it recognises the value of the county town whilst instigating the coordination of improvements, including street furniture, lighting, greening, and public realm as well. Now, it's intended for the town centre strategy, sir, to be subject to relevant ongoing engagement before it being ready by the end of this year. It may also then feed into future local plan reviews as supporting strategy and evidence with the policy framework, of course, being placed within the future local plan reviews themselves. There's also significant delivery emanating from the 2017 local plan, and this includes office to residential and furthermore the opportunity sites which we've mentioned, such as Len House and Moat Road. And that's in addition to other sites of significance, such as Baltic Wharf and the wider Maidstone Riverside. The sites illustrate the significant engagement that has taken place and the progress made in bringing these sites forward. And we are also, as an authority, actively seeking to intervene in the town centre, and we would illustrate this through, for example, Maidstone East, where we're ensuring that we bring this forward to meet requirements of a large mixed-use scheme, and it shows how the council wishes to also de-risk schemes within the town centre. We are, however, sir, basing this around realism. You've referred to the main modification. The original intention was to bring forward 700 units on sites to be confirmed within the town centre. And we are now revising that downwards per ED 31 to 215 units. That's paragraphs 4.28 and 4.29. The updated position is broken down in our response to matter 6.1 and illustrates now that we have confidence in that updated figure, but we wanted to make sure that we were cautious, hence the proposed main modification. I see Mr. Coyne has got his toe blown up, but I'll finish there, so thank you very much.
Sorry,
Mr. Coyne.
Just a very brief point on the town centre strategy. So obviously this is to 2050. The sort of physical work on the strategy that Mr. Edgerton referred to is ongoing. It will support the work that was done on the opportunity sites, and a big part of that town centre strategy is really about creating some of the softer conditions for sort of regeneration and renaissance around leisure and arts and culture, and getting people sort of back into the town centre. But notwithstanding that, some of that will be about the sort of very physical components of the town centre, and are the things that we have at the moment in the right place. And one opportunity that has already presented itself, which the council is looking at, is the potential for instance, the Lot Meadow sort of leisure and activity centre, which has got a range of activities, but is just sort of peripheral at the moment to the town centre. That if those sorts of activities that bring a lot of families in, who currently come to the town centre but park at Lot Meadow, do what they want to do and leave, if that was in the heart of the town centre, that could be quite an important catalyst for growth. So that's one of the things. The council actually owns the centre and is now looking at trying to sort of relocate some of those activities into the town centre, which would release sort of potentially quite significant residential numbers onto the site that it currently occupies, or onto part of the site that it currently occupies. So it is, that would sort of, we would look to sort of, that would be under the sort of what is the broad location for the town centre, but just as sort of evidence, hopefully, that the town centre is already starting to yield conditions to contribute to growth, or the strategy rather. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the sum of the council's suggested main modification to the policy, I think articulated in your Matter 6 statement is effectively to bring the town centre housing capacity down from, I think it was just over 3,000 in the submitted plan to just under 2,500 through the various changes, which I understand is the council taking perhaps a more cautious approach to what some of these areas could deliver within the plan period.
That's correct, sir, yes.
Yep. And where the policy says, I appreciate the policy is in various parts. So the first part is providing the framework, as I see it, for the preparation of the town centre strategy. Part two is effectively a development management criteria, and then part three summarises the development potential. At the end of the policy, that's not a note, that's a kind of the policy will be updated and reviewed when the town centre strategy is adopted. So upon adoption of the town centre strategy, that could be a trigger for reviewing or looking again at this policy as part of the next local plan. That's not a sort of a hangover or note. That's something that's going to be done as part of this plan. That would follow as part of the next plan. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, sir. I think the intention here is just to ensure that we're doing work as soon as possible to ensure that the town centre remains an absolute focus for Maidstone Borough Council as the most sustainable location in the borough, and the town centre strategy should really give us the momentum and trigger to be able to do that for the next local plan review. Thank you.
And can I just check with the council that the revised figures for the town centre capacity is reflected in the updated housing trajectory?
Yes, sir, that's correct. They're updated in the trajectory.
And just as a general point, I'll bring others in on this because this is kind of some of the sort of the nub of the soundness concerns. Does the council have anything further it wishes to add or say in terms of the concerns or the criticisms that the plan is perhaps being over optimistic on town centre residential capacity in terms of the mix of broad location and opportunity sites? We'll look at some of them in more detail shortly, but in terms of the general concern about the realism of what's being put before me, allied with, I think, the potential that the town centre sites could deliver potentially more kind of smaller units, 1 to 2 bedroom type units, perhaps at variance with where the strategic housing market assessment evidence is saying in terms of housing need. I think as Mr. Edgerton alluded to, this is all taking place in currently a low value area in terms of viability and the implications that may have for affordable housing yield. I appreciate there's a lot in there, but it's kind of just picking away a bit more at kind of the realism of what the council's putting forward, that these are not just broad sites that may or may not happen.
Thank you very much indeed. So before I hand over to colleagues to talk in a little bit more detail about the capacities of sites, I think the first thing to say is that we have strong delivery within the town centre. We have demonstrated that through, for example, our annual surveying and published information on the council's website, which illustrates the very important role that the town centre is playing within the borough for delivery. Sources, obviously, there is a potential windfall component to this, but the opportunity area guidance is being delivered. We'll come on to some of the detail there, but these sites are being brought forward. This is realistic, sir, and you'll hear from colleagues in a second to illustrate that point. Another component is the office to residential element to this, and that has continued to be very strong within Maidstone Borough. Maidstone Borough has unfortunately had a number of offices which have not been considered suitable for purpose anymore. Times have changed, technology requirements and so forth have changed as well, and a significant number of developments are still being converted to residential, and there's a number around this town hall as well, so that illustrate that point. And I think the momentum is being retained through the town centre strategy, which we anticipate, considering particular areas in more detail to ensure that they do come forward. The sites themselves, that we have considered have all been put through the strategic land availability assessment process in terms of those which have been allocated. And I'd like to hand over to colleagues who can just go into a little bit more detail about the nature of the capacities on those sites, the factors that we've considered to demonstrate their realism in coming forward.
Thank you, sir. So just giving a bit more of that detail into what's actually happening on the ground on those sites. Obviously, we've talked about the opportunity guidance, the 5 opportunity guidance sites. 2 of those have already got planning permission since that opportunity guidance was released. That's Len House and Moat Road. Len House, particularly tricky with some heritage and listed building constraints, and yet there's still the market appetite to develop. The site has permission. Between those 2 sites, we're talking about approximately 330 units coming forwards on those. In terms of Maidstone Riverside, it is made up of sort of 4 parcels of land. Whilst it hasn't got planning permission yet, there is 1 application pending at the moment, and a further one on Baltic Wharf Power Hub site. They've had public consultation on that in the region of about 200 units. So the momentum is there, the market appetite is there, and again, similar to Len House, Baltic Wharf has got heritage constraints, but there is still confidence in the market to bring forward a viable scheme in that location. I've already touched on Maidstone East as well, and the fact that the council now part own the site. We've had a public consultation on that half of the site, bringing it forwards for a planning application very soon, again in the region of about 200 units, plus some commercial floor space as well. I think between those sites, on their own at least, that is showing strong market appetite and deliverability, and the public sector leverage to actually bring those sites forwards.
Thank you. I don't know if in terms of the demand from office to residential in Maidstone Town Centre, has that been happening under the permitted development regime? Is that the general trend, or coming from a variety of sources?
Yes, sir, the majority has been through the original form of the prior notification routine. Some of the more recent schemes have been subject to the more detailed tests regarding floor space, which has helped the council impose further obligations on minimum room sizes and quality of accommodation, as well as assessing schemes against, for example, the more recent fire tests. One example is over your right-hand shoulder, the brick building that's currently being reclad. That's a conversion of around 84 units, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'll now bring in others, and I'll start with Countryside, and then I'll move to Gleeson. In terms of, I think you're describing as concerns about the capacity that's being identified for the town centre. So, Mr. Mosley first, please.
Thank you, sir. As you rightly identify, housing within the town centre forms quite a significant component of future housing land supply. Countryside, along with many other people making representations to the Regulation 19 local plan, raised concerns that the 3,000 units identified wouldn't be deliverable in total, and asked for further clarification in terms of the evidence base to underpin that. Obviously, you've heard today that the council's revised those figures down by a further 500 units, and I think that highlights our concerns that the evidence base wasn't there to underpin issues around site availability, deliverability rates, and also viability. If I touch on those, in terms of the evidence base, you just heard that all the sites have been put through the strategic land availability assessment. The inspector will note that at paragraph 2.15 of the strategic land availability assessment, it states that as the plan progresses and representations are made, the availability of these sites could be challenged, and that the council will need to ensure that there is landowner agreement for sites which are included within the plan. That's at paragraph 5.1 of page 24. When you look at the evidence, sir, it's clear that some of the sites have been advanced by the council without necessarily the agreement of the landowners. So, for instance, a significant proportion of Maidstone Riverside is actually an occupied site, and a significant proportion of that owned by Capital and Region and Aviva Investments. We've not seen as part of the evidence base an agreement with the landowner to the redevelopment or any timescales for bringing forward the substantive proportion of that site. Maidstone West is occupied by B&Q, and the SHLAR at LPR 2.15 says that currently there is no developer interest. And the mall, sir, which is 400 units, carries over a 2017 allocation, but again, there's no sign of a scheme coming forward on that site. In terms of delivery timescales and rates, the Housing, Land Supply and Delivery topic paper, ED 66 at page 25, provides another trajectory. I would contrast that with ED 31, which is the previous trajectory, which made it quite clear in terms of the different components, being the broad locations within the town centre and part 6 being opportunity sites, whereas now different criteria have been applied to the table at ED 66, which makes it even less clear in terms of the individual components that make up the land supply. What we have, so, is delivery of 574 homes in a broad location town centre within ED 66, with completions from 2025 to 26, but there is no breakdown of the components part, so it's actually difficult to analyse whether or not this is realistic. At ED 31, it detailed the delivery of 820 homes from opportunity sites in a 7-year period from 2025 to 2026 to 2031 to 2032. The new trajectory at ED 66 provides no breakdown of delivery rates and little in the way of evidence in relation to specific town centre sites. The SHLAR at LPR 2.15 at page 233 states that the majority of Maidstone Riverside and Maidstone West would not be available until at least 2030. But again, where is that represented in ED 66? Turning to deliverability, in particular in relation to viability, I think we've highlighted in the past that there is a chronic affordable housing need within Maidstone, which equates to about 47% of the council's entire housing target. The viability assessment, so LPR 5.1, acknowledges that even with no affordable housing, development within the town centre is inviable at densities below 75 dwellings per hectare. In addition, the council acknowledged the need to be more proactive to deliver housing into regeneration, and such measures including additional viability work, public sector funding or intervention. As things stand, sir, a lot of sites within the town centre will deliver zero affordable housing. The council's evidence demonstrates that zero affordable housing is highly probable in town centre sites. We've heard that a proportion of the sites coming forward will be through office to residential conversions, which again don't yield any affordable housing. So we're left with a situation where the council hasn't assessed the affordable housing yield that will derive from the housing targets that it's established. It's taken a deliberate approach in terms of identifying the town centre as an area for regeneration and growth, but it's not assessed the implications of doing that in terms of meeting its own affordable housing needs, which is ultimately one of the priorities of the local plan. So in conclusion, I feel that the council's been over-optimistic in terms of the quantum of homes that will be delivered across the town centre, and it's also not considered its own evidence base in terms of the SHLAR, in terms of the site availability, and in particular evidence from landowners that they will bring forward those sites in the manner that's now reflected in ED 66. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So just so I'm clear on Countryside Properties' position, would your suggestion to me as a main modification be that certain sites are removed from the plan, or that the trajectory needs to be further scrutinised?
I think ED66, the trajectory is wholly unclear in terms of the constituent components of that trajectory. And again, I think it comes back to evidence-based documents talking to each other, in particular in relation to the SHLA and the delivery timescales. We've been presented with a new trajectory which vastly differs from ED31 in terms of when these sites are expected, yet the evidence base that underpins that is identical, sir. So it's difficult to comment because it's difficult to actually understand when some of these sites are due to come forward. I think ultimately, as I say, we've seen the council acknowledging a sort of 20% reduction in what it's anticipating to come forward within the town centre. And I think it needs to be, the term a cautious approach was taken. I think it needs to be more cautious. I think we've highlighted in our representation, sir, that we anticipated around 11 to 1200 units coming forward within town centre sites. We do acknowledge that some sites are available, deliverable within the planned period, sir, but I think when you scrutinise individual sites, it's evident that I think the council's been highly optimistic in terms of having such a significant component allocated towards town centre sites. And I think ultimately, sir, if we were looking at the situation where we were looking at amendments to the plan, I believe that you would need to have a review mechanism should 2,600 homes not come forward within the specific town centre strategy. And I think, again, part of your role, sir, obviously is to assess the soundness of the plan. I think we need comfort that the sites that are identified are available, deliverable within the timescales available. But certainly, sir, I think in terms of the affordable housing, it's a bigger issue than just purely the town centre sites. Is the plan, the council clearly had the opportunity to uplift the housing numbers from the plan to address the chronic under provision of affordable housing. I think as we stand here today, sir, there is no assessment of what this plan will yield in terms of affordable housing. There's no assessment in terms of the negative socio-economic impacts of not meeting the affordable housing need. Recognise that 47% of the overall housing target is a significant element of affordable housing, and that wouldn't be deliverable on individual sites. But the council has chosen not to assess that, and it's chosen not to uplift its housing numbers in recognition that meeting affordable housing need or not meeting it has particularly negative social economic impacts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Mellor, next, please.
Thank you, sir. I don't want to just repeat some of the points that's already been made because you've already covered most of the things I was going to say, but firstly, the point of the reduction in the numbers of broad locations, I think that's reflective of the comments raised by several respondees at Reg 19 and hearing statement stages, and that's welcomed because I think that's the correct approach. However, I think it adds a growing risk to housing numbers over the entire plan period, where the council are trying to achieve a minimum requirement and just achieve that, and actually the cumulative supply of their housing allocations and windfall numbers does not achieve that. And I accept that's been reflected in the stage 1 hearings, but this only adds further weight to that issue of the housing numbers not being achieved overall in the plan period. And then the sort of second main point I'd wish to make, which goes back to the reps and hearing statement that Gleeson have made, is just how the town centre strategy influences the success of the plan overall. And I think if you're looking past the overall housing numbers, you have to look at realistically what the council are achieving from the plan. And yes, again, they are looking to achieve the minimum housing requirements, but there's a failure to address genuine need set out in the SHMA. The town centre strategy, which is a huge number of homes compared to what's being provided elsewhere, will not achieve the required multi-generational homes which are needed. And also there will be significant under delivery of affordable homes over the plan period, which will only lead to increasing affordability issues across the borough and not try and tackle them. Again, coupled with the viability issues of the town centre, the reality is there's going to be a very minimal supply of affordable homes coming forward from this huge component of supply. So what we're advocating for, again, is a bit more scrutiny, and I share the thoughts that there needs to be an assessment or a consideration of what actually is going to be delivered from affordable housing across this plan, and how the plan itself is going to be tackling that key issue of inequality across the plan period. And I think the only realistic approach to dealing with that, if the town centre strategy remains as it is to look at the housing numbers and look at growth of other areas and where that can be addressed, where multi-generational homes can be provided and where viability is not as great a concern, and other schemes can come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Just I'm reasonably clear, but just to reaffirm with Gleeson, I think echoing the points made by Countryside is about broadening supply. If there's still to be a focus in this plan on the town centre, there still needs to be additional supply, primarily in relation to affordable housing delivery and the mix of housing to be delivered. I mean, what on the mix issue? I mean, what's the evidence or the realism that town centre sites will primarily deliver smaller units? Is it the density issue that's been identified in terms of viability, that's the only way that town centre sites can come forward at those particular densities?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the SHMA reflects that for market housing, the need is primarily larger units, 3-4 bed. That makes up the most significant element of housing need across the borough for market homes. And generally, these schemes in the town centre are not delivering that. If they are delivering it, they may have a small element of 3 bed, which would potentially be a corner flat or something in a larger unit. But I think the historic data would show that it's primarily 1 and 2 beds within the town centre. And yes, back to your point, I think the focus on affordability would clearly identify that there are viable areas, as the plan recognises, and there's other. I'm sure there's schemes that can demonstrate viability to deliver full affordable requirements, which is 40% in the high value areas, even though the SHMA advocates 48% against standard method requirements. Obviously there's this disparity there, but if you can increase your housing numbers or supply, clearly it starts to bridge that gap.
Thank you for that. I'll move down the table. I'm still on sort of general concerns or criticisms of the overarching approach to the town centre, particularly in terms of housing delivery. Return to CPRE Kent. I don't know if this is going to be an alternative view that the town centre could do more.
Yes, it will be an alternative view. I quite welcome what the council was saying about they're seeking to create momentum and that they're experiencing strong delivery in the town centre, and there's a market appetite and there's confidence in the market. So we would like to see that confidence coming to fruition through increasing yields in the town centre and looking more closely at densities. And we've already referred you in our statements to the council's evidence in their SLA. That's document LPR 1.14, and they do a roundup of the nature of the densities that are already being achieved. So at paragraph 4.28, we can see that sites that are yielding 10 to 50 units equates to 200 to 500 dwellings per hectare, which is from the countryside charity point of view, is all good, because the more housing that is built in highly sustainable urban locations means there's less pressure put on the countryside, and we can all enjoy the countryside as we did for our mental health and well-being during lockdown. What isn't quite clear, though, is then why the SHLA goes on to say that a reasonable density assumption for the town centre sites is 175 dwellings per hectare. So that's lower than the evidenced amount that the market is actually developing at. And I'm having trouble finding any evidence that those higher densities aren't actually appropriate to these sustainable town centre locations. And then added to that, I'm just going to segue into the policy HOU5, because that would be the policy you'd look at if you were developing these sites, which sets out the densities that are needed. And then the density in the town centres has then been capped at 150 dwellings per hectare. So it's just understanding, making sure that you understand why the density is being reduced to every opportunity, when surely for sustainable development in these highly sustainable locations, we should be looking at increasing the density and there being less land take, less greenfield land take. So that probably throughout the course of the evidence that we'll be giving, making our case, you'll hear me say, probably you may not want me to be repeating every opportunity, but that is the overarching comment that we have, that we just feel that with these great words about creating momentum, strong delivery, the market has an appetite. We would just like to see that appetite backed up by more aspirational densities. And it's quite hard when you're looking at the policy, the policy as written, that the yields are provided per site by site. The intended yields, the likely yields are provided, but they're given as a set number, and it's quite difficult if you're wanting to track progress and the success of the policies. How are you going to determine whether you'd made the best use of the land that was more highly sustainable if there isn't anything that links that back to density? Thank you.
And can I hear next? Is it Mr. Buttle?
Thank you. I'll talk about Baltic Wharf in a little more detail later. I'll come to that policy, but just picking up some of the comments here. Baltic Wharf is now only interested in Maidstone Power Hub, and Baltic Wharf is in single ownership, so I can explain a bit more later. But we have a development site adjacent to Maidstone West, which is 55, 56 dwellings and apartments. And I think just sort of indicating where we feel it is in Maidstone, there's strong interest in that. We've built out the first phase of 12 units. The second phase of 24 flats is about to start. And the third phase of dwellings will come on stream in due course. But yeah, costs have increased dramatically. But we still feel that Maidstone, there is demand in Maidstone. It's a very sustainable location for development, and as I say, there is interest from purchasing, from sale and rentals. And as I say, we've got evidence of that in another site very close to Maidstone West Station.
Okay, so before we move on to look at some of the specific sites, give the council the opportunity to respond to some of describing sort of the general concerns about the approach and the capacity being ascribed to the town centre. Mr. Coyne first.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Smith and Mr. Mackey will come in on the issues around the sort of trajectory and the densities, but a few brief sort of overarching points there is that the reason we've sought through the plan to get flexibility in the affordable housing policy, and I think we touched on this in the stage 1 hearings, was that when it's too rigid, like many town centres, one of the sort of base issues is the balancing of land values and affordability. And when the policy is perceived as too rigid, people developers sort of do their high level appraisal and they actually walk away before they even have the conversation with us. Now, if we can provide provide the basis of that conversation through that flexibility, then at least we've got the opportunity, one, to bring forward development, and two, to see if there are other interventions that we can make to help to increase the levels of affordable housing that we achieve. A big part of the town centre strategy is that sort of that journey in rising land values and increasing demand for development and improving land values over time. The council itself has very publicly stated politically that it is its intention to deliver 1,000 affordable houses, and there is work going on in relation to that. In terms of the attractiveness of the town centre, if we look, for instance, what one of the things the town centre strategy will look at is sort of selling more the locational advantages. We know that we're just over an hour out of Victoria on the Maidstone East line, but a new service toward the end of last year now means that one can go from Maidstone West or Maidstone Barracks to London Bridge Station in 52 minutes, which potentially is a game changer given the sort of flexibility that London Bridge offers sort of when one gets to it. In terms of the densities, I don't think we are sort of under aspirational on densities. I do hear what Ms Davis says, but if you look at the way sort of towns and cities develop, quite often you can see the density of buildings increase as the values increase, and that too is a journey. So if I can hand over to Ms Smith and
Thank you very much, sir. Just a few brief points just to follow up on what Mr. Coyne was saying. Yes, of course, by its nature, often sites within the town centre are built out at a higher density. Densities are, of course, reflected within context and character, existing character and context, and we have to look at this within the overall wider spatial strategy. So densities are likely to be higher within the town centre anyway. We know, sir, that sites are coming forward. We've illustrated that, and that point is illustrated on an annual basis through our annual monitoring matters anyway, and that includes affordable housing as well. The council itself has also committed to around 1,000 new homes within the town centre corporately, and is making significant inroads in that regard. A lot has been made around of that in the press, and so this is not sort of confidential knowledge, but that will also help boost the amount of affordable housing in and around the town centre to help address that issue. I also note, sir, that there is a session specifically to deal with housing delivery and affordable housing in its wider context. That's Matter 8, so which is due to be heard on the 6th of June. And I think it's important that the provision of affordable housing shouldn't be taken in the town centre as a sort of microcosm. The council has a sort of strategy and approach to the delivery of affordable housing within the borough as a whole, which I think we will address in more detail within that session. We also have a review mechanism in place already through the authority monitoring report, which considers the amount of affordable housing which is being delivered, among other matters, as well as overall wider housing delivery. The only other slight thing I would mention is that the densities themselves, they also have to allow for the provision of amenity space and public-private amenity space on sites, whilst reflecting and respecting the character of adjoining areas as well. So we do have to moderate to some extent the densities within our town centre and keep those in proportion as well. But I'll hand over now to Ms Smith. Thank you.
Just before I hear from Ms Smith, just 2 points while they're reasonably clear in my mind, Mr Edgerton. In terms of, you say the council's corporately committed to 1,000 homes I think you said it's in the town centre. is that, are you able to advise to this hearing? Is that because the council is a landowner or a property owner within the town centre? It has assets that it can put in to help deliver that, or is it more in a kind of a leverage role to encourage others or deliver in that mechanism? Are you able to illuminate?
Thank you, sir. The council is actively seeking to create a portfolio of properties that will enable it to bring forward 1,000 affordable homes in and around the town centre. It is something which has been committed to. It is a commitment from the leader of the council, and as I say, has been made light of within the press. We're happy, sir, if you wish us to bring forward some further information around those affordable homes to provide that as a note subsequent to the hearing.
Thank you. My second point, and I appreciate this can be, I may be opening a can of worms I don't necessarily want to open, but I will go there because it's raised in the policy. The policy itself in part 2 talks about how the council will respond to proposals for tall buildings. But is it at a strategic kind of starting point and perspective, and we've referred to density, I mean, is there any kind of barriers or factors that are likely to inhibit tall or taller buildings coming forward within Maidstone town centre? Appreciate there have been some examples.
Yes, sir. So it gets in, as you say, the can of worms issue is, you start thinking about comparisons of what becomes tall in these circumstances. The overall approach, it usually tends to go two ways. First of all, we end up in a 4 stories is tall scenario, which is the approach we haven't taken. We've taken an approach which reflects the overall, I think, character and obviously heritage significance. So obviously Maidstone Town Centre itself does have a significant number of buildings of historical interest, and I think they will still need to be respected by future development. So we would hope, sir, that obviously heritage significance is one of those factors. The overall character, though, is something which I think we would also want to ensure is considered in addition to that. And I notice that perhaps isn't noted in 2B as a factor at this stage. And if you were minded, sir, we would be happy to broaden that to include that reference to overall character of the locality.
Thank you. If I can, I think, hear from others. Next, was it Miss Smith next?
Thank you, sir. Just going back to the point on the SLAR density assumptions within the town centre, that particular paragraph that was referred to, paragraph 4.28 of LPR 1.14, it does set out a range of densities, sites between 5 and 10 units at densities of 100 dwellings per hectare or less, and then sites between 10 and 50 units, generally delivering 200 to 500 dwellings per hectare. So what the SLAR does is take a standardised figure of 175 dwellings per hectare as an assumption to apply consistently across all those town centre sites. And that is what the SLAR does, is apply that consistency. Once we have those assumptions and we've assessed them through the SLAR, we've then progressed through Reg 18B and Reg 19 public consultations and had more in-depth site reviews on a site-by-site basis to really assess the constraints on the individual sites. And that might result in capacities and dwellings per hectare going up or down accordingly. So that's the point on the densities. There was something mentioned about policy HOU 5 and the 150 dwellings per hectare. I think the wording of that policy actually says that's a minimum density to seek. So again, the policy affords that flexibility to go up or down on a site-by-site basis and depending on what proposal is put forward at the time. Moving on to the points made earlier about the trajectory and differences between ED 31 and ED 66 and perhaps the difficulties in the clarity of what's put out in those documents. Obviously, housing land supply and trajectories are live, they're evolving as more evidence comes forwards and work on sites progresses. Delivery, build out rates and trajectories, they do evolve and they do change. So there will have been changes between ED31 and ED66. And every year the council will update its 5-year housing land supply, which will involve further reconfirmation with landowners and promoters as to the delivery and build out of their sites. What we have provided in the evidence documents, ED100, is a very brief update note to update everybody on the changes to the housing trajectory. And I believe it's the intention ahead of the June housing land supply session to actually provide that extra clarity on the sources of the housing delivery and the components and exactly when they are coming forwards in that trajectory. For example, the mall was talked about. That is a very long-term developable site. It's in the end of the trajectory because we know it's going to come as part of that town centre strategy, much longer term. So we're talking 2033, 34 onwards. Again, B&Q site and the Riverside site that we've talked about in the trajectory, they're sort of at the moment planned for 2029, 2030 delivery. So they're not immediate sites to come forwards. Again, hopefully that will be clarified for everybody with the updated information ahead of that housing land supply session.
Thank you. You're able to advise, Mr. I mean, in terms of the council's general approach to these town centre opportunity sites, the remaining allocations and the broad locations, are they generally profiled towards the sort of the latter part of the plan period in terms of the evidence the council has on when these sites may come to them be available or developable?
The majority are within the middle of the plan. There are a few that come forward slightly ahead of that, and that's where we know that things have already progressed. For example, we talked about Maidstone East, where planning application is imminent. So they start model trajectory from 26, 27 onwards. And similarly, Maidstone Riverside, 27, 28 onwards, again, based on the fact that we have got planning applications in progress or imminent.
Thank you. Mr. Mackey.
Thank you, sir. If I could just possibly respond on a few of the points that were made to you. I'll start with density first. If anybody had read my paper, Perceptions of Density, they'd be leaving the room very quickly. I think density has to be approached with a degree of caution. If you go back to the Urban Design Compendium, it tells us that density is an output of good quality design rather than a determiner of design, which is why the Council's guidance on density follows the MPPF in being a minimum. And it is a guide, not a strict test. Having led the Council's major projects team for 3 or more years now, I can confirm that we have a number of schemes that have been considered at both pre-app and application stage that far exceed the general density guidelines in the adopted plan. One example of that is the Moat Road site that is the subject of an opportunity framework which has a detailed planning permission. Another is Len House. The latter is on site. I'm sure you've seen it in your walk around the town centre. That is a relatively low-rise building, but still at a relatively high density because it doesn't follow the traditional plot pattern of say, a greenfield housing site. Len House is a good example of the appetite that does exist in the town centre for urban regeneration schemes. I know Mr. Buttle mentioned their own activity in the town centre, including both Baltic Wharf and other sites. We have, through the pre-application process, received an awful lot of interest from what I would call non-higher tier housing developers, more of the SMEs and the specialist boutique developers for town centre development, as is traditionally the trend. And there's definitely ongoing interest on a large number of sites within the town centre. There are challenges to the town centre, including heritage constraints and others, but that is part of the reason the council promotes a strong pre-application service in order that we can engage with promoters early to identify the capacity of sites, and the opportunity site frameworks, as was mentioned earlier, have been particularly successful. Len House and Moat Road, again, being examples of sites that had little or no interest prior to the council preparing a framework to generate interest, and that's what the town centre strategy will do. We'll take that forward at a more strategic level. Turning, sir, to affordable housing delivery and unit mix, of course, planning permission isn't the only way of securing the delivery of affordable housing through a 106 agreement. As you'll appreciate, sir, there are other mechanisms such as Homes England funding that allow RPs and others to secure affordable housing funding on sites that don't necessarily have a Section 106 percentage within them. And you may not have read it, or you may have had earlier sight of it, but at 10:15, Homes England published their new strategic plan, and that in the press release, which is the only part of it I've read to date so far, sir, it says that Homes England will support a range of housing delivery measures, including both new garden communities and, importantly, urban regeneration. And they talk about urban regeneration quite a lot in that introduction. And that is an approach that the council follows. We understand the town centre is a greater challenge than a greenfield site in terms of how you approach things, but we're confident that within those schemes we can generate sufficient interest to deliver the numbers in the plan. And from the work I've been doing on Riverside and others, I think those numbers are reasonably robust and cautious in terms of overall potential. And finally, sir, and then I'll finish. In terms of unit size mix, the council is looking at schemes which include traditional family housing typologies within the town centre. I know Mr. Buttle's company has delivered family housing on site. Has been completed. He may be able to direct you to have a look at that. So there are examples of not simply small 1 and 2 bedroom flats, but other approaches to family housing, be they flattered typologies or traditional housing types. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buttle. I think you had an invitation there. Thank you. I'm now going to draw matters on LPR SP1 to a close. We'll take a brief mid-morning adjournment now, and then we'll come back to discuss some of the specific sites. Just to pick up Mr. Edgerton's suggestion about a further change to policy LPRS 1, my initial reaction is I'm not persuaded that's necessary for soundness. The council will have other policies that will guide and determine general issues around design and character. I suppose I was thinking in my mind whether there was the evidence to say there are certain areas that are not suitable for taller buildings, whether there's the evidence to the contrary to say this is where we would like to see taller buildings, whether the council had thought about applying a definition to taller buildings, but I think I'm fairly clear the council's not gone there. Whether that's something the town centre strategy will assist with in terms of advancing that forward, and that will feed into a local plan review in due course. But I'm not advocating, I think at this stage, a further change to policy LPRS P1 beyond what the council's already put forward in terms of the revised figures. Okay, we'll take a mid-morning adjournment. If we could be back in this room, please, by the clock here at 20 to 12, and then we'll go through some of the individual. Is that clock right? I've got 20 past, just gone past 20 past 11. If we say 25 to 12, yeah, thank you. So people can be back here, please. Say microphones switched off. I think we'll still be recording. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 25 to 12, so it's time for me to resume this hearing session. We now move on in terms of my agenda to Maidstone East, item 3. This is policy LPR SA 146. And I'd like to understand, I think from the council, I understand this was previously allocated, or part was previously allocated in the 2017 local plan. I think I'm reading general support for this site as a kind of a gateway site into the north of the town centre. If I give the council an opportunity to explain to me that why they consider the policy as submitted is justified, will be effective, in particular requiring a comprehensive master plan for the site.
Thank you, sir. Yes, so this was indeed brought forward from the 2017 local plan. It's intended to be delivered within the first 3 years, actually, and comprises residential led, but a variety of town centre uses as well. I'll just briefly say, so that the word master plan was used fairly heavily in the original version of the policy. The idea was to ensure that both components of this site, so you've got the Royal Mail sorting office and the rest of Maidstone East itself, coming forward at the same time. And that position has moved, sir, with this plan. We've responded to a changing position. So we've moved from master planning to coordination of the two components of the site. So to ensure that one part of the site coming forward before the other doesn't actually stymie development on the other parcel as well. And that's per the modification set out in our MIQ 6.6.
And in terms of assisting my sort of understanding of this site, as you alluded to, Mr. Edgerton, it's in kind of various kind of components. You've got, is it the former mail sorting office, and then there's kind of Cantium House, and then there's kind of the car parking areas to the station. Is this a site that the council is actively bringing together, or does it remain in kind of various kind of components or parcels that kind of justifies that proposed modification that you've outlined, Mr. Edgerton?
Sir, I can assist you with that. The site is effectively now split into two ownerships. If you're looking at the site from, for example, County Hall, to the left you have the Network Rail, I think they call themselves Solent for the purposes of the property interest part, and to the right is the former sorting office and various other office and depot buildings. That half of the site is now entirely owned by Maidstone Borough Council. It was previously jointly acquired by Maidstone and Kent County Council when the two parties were considering a joint corporate HQ on the site. When that proposal fell away as space requirements post-COVID reduced, the council acquired sole interest in the site. The council is in an advanced stage of testing options for the site, including residential and other town centre uses. There have been, I think, 2 pre-application meetings on the site, and the design is evolving in that respect, but we expect a planning application for the site to be made later this year at the latest.
Thank you. And just finally on in relation to this site. I think some concern has been expressed about the principle of kind of higher density, particularly in relation to the setting of, I think it's a grade 2 listed building. Is it the Sessions House, which I think is a Kent County Council building, directly opposite Maidstone East station. I mean, I've visited the area. I've seen other buildings in the setting of that listed building. I've seen the views. Is it Sandling Street, Sandling Road? Does that listed building present an insurmountable barrier to achieving appropriate densities on this redevelopment site?
As a planning authority, sir, the council doesn't consider that it is a prohibitive element in the overall contextual appraisal. The pre-application and also previous work carried out by Kent County Council includes a very detailed assessment of the heritage significance of the Sessions House building. You may be aware, sir, that KCC have plans to retain the central part but are disposing of the two wings. So we've had heavy involvement with them in terms of the impact of development on the setting, but there are intervening buildings including KCC's own Invicta House, which is a medium height modern building that sits partly between the core of Sessions House and the council's part of the site, and the feedback given at pre-application stage advised on what were considered to be appropriate heights, particularly at the forward part of the Maidstone East site.
Thank you. Are there any further points people wish to make in relation to the Maidstone East site? Mr. Mosley?
Just a very short point, sir. Obviously, the council instructed the town centre strategy, and we heard today that that work is due to conclude at the end of 2023. I think it's a shame that you weren't presented, sir, with something that clarified the quantum of development that could be delivered on a site like Maidstone East. You've obviously heard evidence in terms of the pre-application discussions. I think there is a genuine concern around whether or not 500 homes can be accommodated given the setting of Sessions House. Clearly, discussions have got to a stage in the process, but again, we're not being presented, or you're not being presented, sir, with evidence in terms of the realism of delivering 500 homes on what is clearly a sensitive site. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Again, reminded in the council's statement that it wishes to modify from a minimum of 500 to approximately 500, I think, on this site. Is the council able to advise me in terms of its evidence on the capacity? Is that something that's emerging from the kind of the initial, is it pre-application or initial kind of development kind of concepts, proposals for this site? Is that where the figure's coming from, or is this coming through the SHLA process?
Sir, I can confirm that obviously in our advice as planning authority to the council as the developer, we've been very clear about the framework of both the emerging and the existing policies for the site, as we were duty bound to do under section 38.6. I can say, sir, that the scheme, because I wouldn't reveal the pre-application details from that side of the table without their consent, and I don't have any agreement from the authority to do so, but I'm confident to say that the proposals that have been presented thus far are pro rata what you would expect in terms of housing numbers and non-town centre or town centre uses. There are other factors to consider. For example, the council is considering bringing forward an element of family housing on the site, which means it may be slightly less dense, less 1-2 bed units than traditional schemes, but that's the council's desire to bring forward a portfolio of housing typologies in a sustainable town centre location. But for the part of the site that the council has control over, we're certainly sort of very close to the targets that you would expect from a pro rata division of the policy.
Thank you. Are there any further points people wish to make in relation to Site 146, Maidstone East? No, I mean, I will just say this as a sort of a general point. It's not a main modification, but obviously the way the plan is presented is that the policy is referred to sites being included as a draft allocation, and obviously that would need amending to the site is allocated for whatever uses. In which case, I'll then move on to Maidstone Riverside, please, site 148. And again, if I can start with the council, please, in terms of primarily it's, I think, my MIQ 6.7 in terms of whether the site is viable and deliverable in terms of what the council intends to see achieved on this site. Bearing in mind it's kind of in two distinct parcels.
Sir, thank you. You'll be aware in our response to your latest MIQs that we identified there are effectively 4 components to Maidstone East. On plan, you're correct, it looks like a northern and a southern part, but in reality there are 4 separate components to the site. Starting top right, that is the site owned by Mr. Buttle's company, which is the subject of emerging proposals, and I'm sure he can conform those. The view of the council is that, and because of the proximity of the sites and the fact that they are clearly related to each other and to the aspirations to improve the corridor between the stations, that a single site allocation policy as an umbrella policy is appropriate, but we fully accept that there may be a slightly different approach on each site. For example, Baltic Wharf contains a significant heritage asset and therefore faces different challenges to the others.
Thank you. And as I heard earlier this morning, obviously there's some scepticism around the deliverability of some of these sites, and in particular people have referred to me in relation to this site. Particularly the southern parcels are currently in active retail use. So you've got kind of the Wicks, the Lidl, and other retailers. Is it St. Peter's Wharf Retail Park? The view as to the realism as to the availability and deliverability of particularly that part of the site. I don't know if the council's wishes to respond specifically to that point, Mr. Coyne.
Obviously, sir, this has been one of the opportunity sites, and under that sort of opportunity site sort of process, we are talking to the owners of the site. We do think that there is redevelopment potential there. Importantly, one of the things that we will be looking at, and this is getting very specific, but hopefully you'll find it of use. One of the things that we'll be exploring further through the town centre strategy, which has previously been discussed, is a pedestrian bridge link between St. Peter's and probably Fremlin Walk, because of the span of the river and the 229. It would probably need to come from a high point on the other side. That's something we have had initial conversations with the Rochester Bridges Trust about that. Who are willing to work with us, so we will have further conversations. So we are in discussion with the owners for that part of the site, and we are looking at sort of new strategic infrastructure that would actually, we think really be a catalyst to redevelopment by improving that connectivity with the heart of the town centre.
Okay, thank you. If I can perhaps hear now from others and then potentially come back to the council on this point, but Mr. Mosley first, please.
Thank you, sir. I just draw your attention. I think again, when I made my opening comments, it was in part around the deliverability of this allocation, and you quite correctly highlighted that the fact that there is a range of long-term tenants in place at present, and it seems to be quite a successful retail operations that have been undertaken there. Hence why I think Lidl has moved in relatively recently. I think it would help, sir, if you looked at the Maidstone Riverside planning guidance that was produced by Savills on behalf of Maidstone, and it does acknowledge that the what it describes as the recent construction of buildings in the southern area of the site having associated long leases means that this area is likely to be developable in the long term. That's on page 11 of that document. And it goes down to break out the constituent elements. I think it's recognised that sites such as the Power Hub, Baltic Wharf are likely to come forward. I think there's obviously a very positive statement from the Baltic Wharf Limited in that regard. What the Savills document does say is that St Peter's Street East is unlikely to be deliverable within the next 10 years, and St Peter's Street West, which is 90 units, there is no timescale afforded to that whatsoever. Again, in my opening comments, I made the point around ED66 and the lack of transparency in terms of the constituent elements, but from what I can derive from the figures, it seems to be that the delivery timescales for the whole of that allocation have been shifted back around 4 or 5 years, right to the back end of the plan period. And again, I don't know what's changed in that regard. So when the council drew up the local plan and submitted it, that Savills evidence was there. And obviously ED33 was based on, or ED31 was based on a completely different trajectory for the 647 town centre units derived from this allocation on the opportunity sites. So I think it's a fairly nuanced response, but I think there's elements of this site that may well come forward, but I think the council's own evidence sort of highlights the fact that it requires quite a significant intervention to enable the totality of the site to come forward. And with the long-term leases in place, it does raise the prospect that this site won't be delivered within the plan period, or if it will be delivered, it will require some form of public sector intervention. And again, you're not being presented with any evidence to say that this site is going to be compulsory purchased, or that the landowners here are actively promoting this site being redeveloped within the planned period. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Here next from Mr. Buttle, please.
Thank you, sir. If you'll indulge me. Our preference would be for a single policy for the Baltic Wharf and the Power Hub site. It is a sustainable brownfield site. There are obviously heritage issues in terms of the listed building on there, but I can expand on those. The site is in single ownership, and therefore delivery should be easier rather than being included in a wider policy which may be constrained by other ownership or leases, as been discussed. Site has previously had a planning permission and listed building consent for a substantial and significant redevelopment at a planning appeal for a retail development, which we've submitted details of as part of our evidence. And whilst that has lapsed, in terms of the application permission, it's still a material consideration in terms of what was acceptable at appeal in terms of the impact and construction of that site. We currently have an application, or we're preparing an application for a hybrid application for a mixed-use development, and that intention is to submit by the end of this month, early next month, and I can provide a few more details if you'll give me the chance in a minute. As has been indicated earlier by the Borough Council, we have a strong track record of delivery locally. In terms of industrial, commercial and residential developments in Maidstone, Tunbridge Moorling, and Medway as well. The site is subject to an existing allocation and obviously a draft allocation in the emerging local plan. and as a site, it's also a key opportunity site for the council. In terms of where we are, we've undertaken pre-app meetings with Maidstone since 2021-22. We had a members briefing in June 2022 and also have engaged with KCC Highways. We have a planning performance agreement with Maidstone Borough Council and informally had meetings with Historic England in spring, summer 2022. We held public consultation in October 22 and have also had informal meetings with some of the members of the planning committee at the Borough Council. As I said, we were preparing a hybrid application for submission in December last year, but received a response from Historic England raising some concerns about the original proposal. We put that application on hold and have subsequently reviewed that process. We've also had meetings with the council subsequently and also now have a formal agreement with Historic England to retain part of the listed building and also to retain and convert the Raglan House, which is not listed but has subject to a certificate of immunity. That application process, as I said, is progressing, and there is the intention to submit that by the end of the month, early next month, and that will comprise conversion of the Power Hub building, which is approximately 136 one, two and three bedroom apartments, with 2 additional floors to be included in that, and then conversion of Raglan House for 12 apartments, new riverside dwellings of 11 houses, and a new apartment building fronting St Peter's Street of 32 dwellings. We're also proposing commercial Class E floor space at ground floor, circa 1,100 square metres, and that at the moment is looking to be split into 3 usable and flexible units. Also looking at the implementation of a riverside walkway, which is the completion of that, and as a priority for Maidstone Borough Council, open space and car parking within the site as well. The scheme has been revised and amended in response to Historic England's previous comments. It is now considered to be progressive, positive and sympathetic to the character and setting of the listed building. We will have to take it back to the frame, replacement of all the brick panels, all the windows and all the sills. So whilst there will be an impact, that impact is now considered to be minimal or at the lower end of less than substantial harm. As I said earlier, the site is in single ownership and there are no legal constraints to delivery, and the application will be supported by a viability assessment, condition survey and a cost report, and the proposal as it currently stands, we believe, represents the optimum viable use. I do have the presentation material which we gave to Historic England, which I have put forward, but appreciate that it's new information, but if you do want a copy, and the council have got copies of that as well, more than welcome to see that for information and to assist your consideration of the site. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I mean, as I understand it, Mr. Bussell, you said at the start your position is you would like to see for soundness a specific policy relating to the Power Hub and the Raglan House site, the Baltic Wharf site. Just so I'm clear, that wouldn't include land to the west of St Peter's Street, so that wouldn't include the Jewson's complex.
That's in different ownership. That's not within our ownership. So we would prefer to see a policy specifically for the Power Hub building and the Baltic Wharf, and land to the north of the railway as well, which is in our ownership.
And in terms of seeking that single policy, are you concerned, or what is your concern that in terms of the policy as it stands, in terms of potentially inhibiting or adversely impacting on your company's plans or intentions for your site?
It's simply the case of we believe that we can bring forward this site. It's deliverable. As I say, it's in single ownership, and as has been alluded to, there are other parts of Maidstone Riverside which are in multiple ownerships or have multiple tenancies, and therefore we don't want to be constrained or inhibited by any delay that may cause in due course.
Thank you. I'm mindful, I think similar to the discussion we just had a moment ago on Maidstone East, the council's proposing a modification in its response to my maths issues and questions, I think along similar lines, I think, to Maidstone East in terms of the response to kind of comprehensive master planning. Is that correct in terms of the council's response to my MOQ 6.8?
Yes, so that's correct. In paragraph 6.84, 6.8.4 of our MIQ response, we set out the proposed main mod, and it does follow the same wording as Maidstone East for that same reason.
And as I see that main modification, it's effectively would allow, you know, individual developments to come forward, providing they don't compromise or adversely affect kind of the overall ambition and sort of capacity that's being sought on these sites. In terms of the suggestion that's been put forward about a specific policy for the Baltic Wharf site, I mean, is that something the council has considered or would have an adverse reaction to?
Thank you, sir. Yes, I think the council's point here is it wishes to ensure that that area is brought forward in a coordinated way. The policy applies to all of the parcels on that area, and I think just conversely, we don't actually see that the policy itself will stop development taking place from Baltic Wharf. We recognise, and I'll bring in Smith to just talk a little bit about the trajectory. We recognise that different parcels will come forward at different points in this process, and there's nothing in that policy that will stop Baltic Wharf coming forward as part of the earlier stages in that regard. I'll just bring in Smith to clarify the trajectory we have in that regard.
Yes, thank you. Just on the point on the trajectory, we have reflected it in the modelled delivery rates, and we're sort of cautiously putting approximately 200 units to begin delivering 27-28 over the following 3 years, and actually the bulk, the remaining sort of approximately 450 units, we wouldn't be expecting to be delivering until sort of 2030, 31 onwards, and that is reflective of where they are at the moment in terms of bringing the sites forwards and what's currently on the site now. So we have intentionally made that differentiation in the delivery to reflect the current stage of planning application for the earlier sites.
Thank you. And in terms of making that distinction, Ms. Smith, is that in response to the evidence I'm hearing in terms of, I think primarily from Mr. Buttle and the ambition on that site?
Yes, so it's from the Baltic Wharf site and the current application that's pending a decision on the Dewson's side as well. I think that's for 85 units and some commercial floor space too.
And just to add to that, sir, that effectively of the 4 quarters of that site allocation, 3 of them are in individual single ownerships. The northwestern quarter, the Dewson's plot for simplicity, we've had a pre-app and a planning application for a party that has assembled all but the Dewson land. So effectively there are only 2 ownerships on that. But what the council, I think, wants to achieve with an overarching policy is to avoid sort of fragmented piecemeal development. That is unlikely because of the larger ownerships that have now been secured. But I think the intention is that we, as Mr. Edgerton pointed out, we want a coordinated rather than controlled approach, if that makes sense, by avoiding individual piecemeal schemes on those smaller sites.
Thank you. In relation to the 2 southern quarters, if I continue that analogy, the ones that are currently in the retail use, and what's the council's ambition or objective through this priority? Is it to still seek to retain those kind of mix of uses ultimately through this site? Because I think one of the other proposed modifications, as I understand it, is to remove some of the detail around the specific floor space figures for retail and employment, as a matter that's presumed to be determined through the town centre strategy.
I think we would want to look at that through the town centre strategy, sir. And you know, one of the things that sort of does jump out really is that at the moment the sort of overall configuration of uses doesn't really maximise the river frontage, and we'd want to look at uses that make more of that river frontage. So that's, I suppose, the other point I would make is that we're aware of, you know, some of the existing retail on there. We know that there's been a fundamental shift in retail in post-COVID. We're aware of the lease lengths that Mr. Mosley referred to, etc. But in my experience, the length of leases in terms of sort of lifting and shifting things is not always the issue. It's being sensible about good relocation options and things that are viable for businesses.
Thank you. And finally, from for the council on this particular site, I mean, if I was to leave this room with kind of concerns about the delivery of the southern part of this site, what we've just been talking about, what would be the council's reaction to a proposed modification that saw the site, the southern part of the site, taken out, so that it was just the remaining allocation was the two northern quarters? I'm not saying this is where I'm going, but I'd just be interested to hear the council's view on what implications that could potentially have.
I think so. We from discussions we're having and the fact that we've got that part of the site at the back end of the trajectory, and you know, driven also by schemes like Mr. Buttle's that are coming forward, and we'll, you know, we've seen, haven't we, elsewhere, the domino effect that development has. At the other side, there's, as you sort of go around the river, we've got the B&Q site that we'll talk about later. We've got the Lot Meadow site that we've talked about today. So you can see that the area's starting to be bookended, and you know, even, you know, necessarily without the council's intervention, you quite often see the sort of domino effect that changes areas. Now, with the council's intervention, we are confident that we can bring forward change in that area.
Thank you. Just so that, sorry, Mr. Coyne, I understand when you say council intervention, obviously you've got the kind of the opportunity sites document from 2019 to kind of stimulate interest and what have you. Obviously there'll be the town centre strategy. Is there anything else that kind of adds to that arsenal?
I think what I'm referring to, sir, is the fact that we we are talking to the owners, but we, as you would expect under the opportunity area guidance, but we will work actively as part of the town centre strategy to see where there are uses that we think would be better located elsewhere, to come up with positive options for, you know, there are some of the things without obviously being specific. You'll appreciate why, sir. There are some of the activities on that side of the river that would actually be so much better in the heart of the town centre in terms of the footfall they would bring. There are other things that might actually be better a little bit outside the town centre, because they will generally bring car-borne traffic, which is just adding to congestion. So the town centre strategy and the opportunity site, you know, we will take a very proactive approach to working with people to change that. And things like the proposal that we're exploring for the pedestrian bridge, we do think that's a potential real game changer for that West Bank, sir. So I think just to reiterate, I think we are very confident that we can bring about that change.
Okay. Before I move on to other sites, we'll give Mr. Mosley a further opportunity.
Just a brief one, sir. I think you highlighted the fact that the council's obviously undertaken the Savills report, the SHLA on page 233 states that I think the bulk of the site's owned by Canada Life, the insurance company. And obviously, at that point in time, it was projected that some of the later phases of development wouldn't happen within at least a 10-year period. Obviously, we're a few years down the line, and I don't think you're being presented with any new evidence to suggest that that site is going to come forward. I appreciate the council's aspiration in that regard, but that would ultimately be a windfall if it was to come forward, rather than specifically an allocation. So I think I support the council's ambition, but I think ultimately it hasn't used the momentum from the Savills report to firm up the substantive part of that site to enable you to have the confidence to allocate it, and the likelihood that it will be deliverable within this plan period, sir.
There's that the Savills report was pre-COVID, and the redevelopment of that that West Bank area was always going to be in sort of bite-sized chunks, for want of a better term, and that is actually what we see happening now.
And Mr. Mackey as well, please.
I think so. Just to add an additional layer to that, these are key sites in a highly sustainable location. They're surrounded by 3 railway stations, which is relatively unique and within the edge of the town centre boundary. Despite that, they're very large footplate, low density uses that don't add to all the things that the MPPF encourages in town centres, which is mixed use, housing, etc. It wouldn't take much. I mean, to convert a long lease, which is very attractive in terms of rental income for a pension fund, into a risk doesn't take much in terms of a retailer's change in strategy. For the council to therefore have a policy framework in place that allows for that eventuality, or even demonstrates to a landowner that actually regeneration may be more viable for them than a long-term investment which they can take elsewhere. We feel that it's far more appropriate therefore to have a policy framework in place rather than rely on a windfall approach to something that is a very key strategic site with the characteristics that I've described.
Okay, thank you. Just very finally on Maidstone, Riverside. I've got representations in front of me from the Environment Agency about biodiversity net gain. I mean, I'm not suggesting any further changes are necessary. I'm mindful the council has an overarching policy that we'll come on to in week 3 on 20% biodiversity net gain, and I note the Environment Agency raises no objection in relation to potential flood risk at this location. The one other representation I've got that I wasn't entirely sure about was from Kent County Council, who are seeking a reference to I think more active travel routes. Now I don't know if this is an oblique reference to an additional river crossing or what the county council has in mind. I don't know if the council is aware of what the county council might be thinking of in terms of more active travel routes.
I don't, but my suggestion would be that it's talking about sort of redeveloping the river and ensuring that we keep good pedestrian and cycle routes and other things along the river bank, which is something obviously we would do as part of good planning. Anyway, I don't know if any colleagues might have another interpretation on.
No, I would agree with Mr. Coyne there. So a couple of points here. First of all, there is a Maidstone river footpath and cycle path that extends along, and the aim to get it to Allington Lock. So it may well be that there's reference to that. We also hold regular sustainable transport meetings with Kent County Council, which would provide an appropriate forum potentially to clarify some of that with them as we move forward as well. But it may well be that it's that cycle route along the river that they're referring to. I would also add, sir, that in respect of the policy itself, at 148, we, under access, highways and transportation, there is the third bullet refers to suitable access to the highway network required and linkages to town centre, active travel routes and schemes is recommended.
Further points in relation to Site 148, Maidstone Riverside. I'll move on. I've noted the various submissions that have been made. We go on to Maidstone West, Site 149. This site was intended, I think, to deliver just over 200 units on planned submission, and I think it's now proposed to be reduced to 130. So I think my starting question for the council is that a justified approach and something that's necessary to be recommended for soundness?
Thank you, sir. So that the change in the dwelling numbers comes from, again, the opportunity guidance on that site. They actually included two different scenarios, one with 201 units, one with 130 units, and that involved demolishing some of the existing buildings that were there, all of the existing buildings for the 201 units, and actually retaining some of the existing buildings for the 130 unit scheme. And as a council, we have looked through both of those proposals, and we feel the more cautious and better planned approach would actually be to keep some of the buildings on the site. Hence, we've gone with the 130 units as an approximate figure as opposed to 201.
Thank you for that. And similarly to the discussion we've just had in relation to Maidstone Riverside, obviously this site is in an active use retail. I think is it B&Q are currently on this site. So again, is the evidence that this site is available and potentially deliverable within the plan period from the council's perspective?
Yes, so we've actually modelled it in the trajectory, again, sort of a middle of the plan period, 2029, 30 onwards, reflecting that there is currently an active retail use there, but that the site is developable in the medium term.
And just to add to that, that site is in public ownership, not this public authority, but it's in public ownership, and there is a conversation that has started with regard to its longer term future.
Thank you. Mr. Mosley, please.
Thank you, sir. I think it may be a point where there's a little bit of conflicting evidence. I note that the council, in their statement, said that Kent County Council are the freeholder. The SHLA, so this LPR 2.15 on page 239, seems to indicate that the site's owned by Legal and General. And it says in terms of developer interest, the SHLA says currently no developer interest. So I think, again, in terms of the evidence that's been put forward, it's having the confidence that the site is available and deliverable within what's been now presented at ED 66. It might be my misreading of what the SHLA says, but I think it just requires some clarification that this site is in public ownership and that the ED 66 trajectory, again, there's no clarity in terms of the individual sites being brought forward, but it's for you to have, sir, the sort of clarity that this site is indeed deliverable.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, please.
Thank you, sir. Just on the point on the SLA and the ownership, on page 239, You'll see the red line boundary is actually drawn around the Maidstone West B&Q site, and it's also drawn around Broadway as well. So I believe Legal and General owned the Broadway site at that time. That's why they're listed there. But in terms of the allocation that we've included in the plan, it doesn't include the Broadway part, just the Maidstone West B&Q site.
Thank you. Is that a further point, Mr. Moser's nameplate up
I
from
mean,
earlier?
it does clarify, but it does beg the question why the SLA didn't identify the individual owners, and ultimately the SLA says that there's no current developer interest, and one would assume that if it relates to both sites, that statement equally applies to this site as it does the other. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I've got no further questions on Maidstone West. There's nothing further from the council. No, on this site. No. In which case, I'll just briefly look at other town centre sites and locations. I've already heard this morning in relation to site 145 is this Len House, which I think is now under construction. I suppose this is a sort of a general question, perhaps coming back to where we started this morning's discussion. I mean, if I was concerned about town centre capacity or ability to deliver new homes, I mean, is Len House a catalyst site? I mean, is it a sign that the market will take on town centre sites other than through the permitted development routes?
Thanks, sir. I think Lynn House is a good example in a way, in that it's probably one of the more constrained sites in the town centre in terms of the scale of the heritage asset and its sensitivity. Its previous use as its history as an iconic car dealership for the Roots Group, and there are particular features internally within the building, such as the open voids and the vehicle ramp to the first floor, that are particularly unique. But the developer's been able to work with those, and the council have been flexible in terms of allowing alterations and extensions to create a viable scheme for the site. Phase 1 is the listed building, that is underway. Phase 2 also has detailed consent. That's new build on what looks like the construction compound to the right. There's a current pre-app to change the design of that element. The approved scheme is a mini-me version of the listed building, whereas the applicants are now looking at a more traditional form that's more complementary to the Burbage plots on the high street behind. That would increase the unit numbers by 1, but nothing significant. But all the conversations with the developer demonstrate that they're very committed to taking that scheme through.
Thank you. And I assume, obviously, whilst that site is under construction, the council want to see that policy remain within the plan to kind of just ensure, as you say, Mr. Mackey, are there any further revisions or amendments to that scheme? You've got a policy that relates to that site. And does similar apply in relation to site 151, which is the Moat Road site? So this, again, is another site that now has planning consent. Is that right, from what I understood earlier?
That's correct, sir. Moat Road site was granted detailed planning permission just under 2 years ago. I checked with the agents a couple of weeks ago, and the site is now showing as sold. I believe that reflects the sale to the party that pursued planning, rather than them having flipped it to another party because they had an option to acquire at the time. But that appears to demonstrate that not only have they invested in planning permission, but they've invested in the acquisition of the site as well.
Thank you. In relation to the moat road side, I'll bring Mr. Mosley in shortly. But in relation to the moat road site, one of the proposed modifications is for an additional criteria in terms of pedestrian crossing facilities. Is that necessary for soundness? Is that something that has been secured as part of the existing consents?
The planning permission does not include a specific pedestrian crossing, but it includes various Section 106 contributions to improvements in sustainable transport measures. At the time that the planning permission was granted, that was considered to be contribution to a cycle scheme on the site. The cycle scheme is paused for the time being, so the expectation is that it would be diverted to other measures, and there are other consents in the town centre, including Tonbridge Road, that would make similar contributions to improvements to assist pedestrians in what is quite a busy gyratory part of the town centre.
Thank you. And in terms of the plan itself, I assume this additional criterion that's being proposed was generated by Kent County Council representations. I mean, was that the council's thinking in terms of a modification for this policy? Is it because of where it's located on the? Would you call it the town centre gyratory?
Apologies, sir. I couldn't be definitive in your answer to the question, but your suspicions may be correct, and I suspect what KCC are doing is, should somebody else come forward with a variation to the approved scheme, then they have an opportunity to switch that sustainable transport contribution to site-specific measures. But there are nearby crossings at the light control junctions that, at the time of the planning application, we felt were satisfactory.
So if I could just add to that, I believe that is the case. In fact, that it has come through from Kent County Council. It sounds exactly like the sort of thing that they would want to achieve from the site to ensure that it is fully accessible, hence it being under access highway transportation.
Thank you. Mr. Mosley, was this on?
Yes, it was. I think whilst we were describing Len Road, Moat Road, sorry, and the power hub, obviously you're being asked to consider modifications to policies to require viability assessments on town centre sites where they don't deliver any affordable housing. It's really a point that, I mean, clearly these sites are coming forward. So Len, House, Moat Road and the Power Hub clearly are coming forward, but they're coming forward with zero affordable housing. I think you've got practical examples here of the viability difficulties of delivering within town centre sites. So as much as the council aspires to deliver affordable housing, you've got practical examples of 3 sites which collectively aren't delivering any affordable housing. I mean, they're making a significant contribution towards regeneration, but they're not delivering affordable housing because of viability issues. So I think, again, it comes back to the point that was made earlier. Can you rely on potential uplift in value from regeneration? Well, clearly the council's evidence doesn't support that, because that's what its viability looks at. It looks at revenues as things stand, and obviously projects those forward in terms of when these sites are coming forward, and it's not showing, and the practical realities are these sites aren't delivering affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. In relation to the other town centre sites, the final one I was going to raise from my perspective was, I think the mall is identified as a broad location for around about 400 units. And again, the evidence that that's reasonable or realistic to put that figure in. I think this is is this a site that was previously identified in the 2017 local plan? I think the submissions before me say that this is still obviously an active kind of retail location. So again, it's kind of the reasonableness of the council's approach to 400, potentially 400 new homes at that location.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. This was something which has been carried forward from the 2017 plan for that amount of units. We've been having discussions with the owners of this site, and of course it's the case now that Maidstone owns some part of that, having purchased Maidstone House itself. I think we've been fairly cautious, having said that, with the moles, sir. And I'd just like to hand over to Ms. Smith regarding when we're bringing that forward. But I do believe we're bringing that forward fairly late on anyway, to ensure that we've got adequate time to incorporate it within the town centre strategy as part of a consolidated approach to bringing forward this scheme. I just wonder if Ms. Smith can clarify the trajectory for that.
Certainly, yep, that's correct. We've pushed it right back to the end of this plan period, so we wouldn't be expecting delivery until sort of 2033, 34 onwards, recognising that it was in the 2017 local plan and a lot has changed with retailing since then, but that it is an eminently sensible site for a longer term redevelopment of a potentially underutilised brownfield site within the town centre.
If I may add to that, sir, as well, under the excuse me, the current work on the town centre strategy, the Commission includes a sort of a deep dive into a limited number of sites to come up with sort of medium-term development strategies and sort of visioning, and the mall will be one of the mall area will be one of those areas that will undergo some quite detailed work in terms of the next phases of that town centre strategy.
Thank you. Mr. Mosley, please.
Thank you, sir. Obviously, we're looking at an existing local plan allocation. What the local plan promoted was comprehensive retail redevelopment, in part a mixed use of that site. So that was obviously 6 years ago now. Again, is it realistic? We've seen from ED31 to ED66, the timescales for delivery have shifted back 5+ years. And again, one would assume that ED31 that was presented to this examination was based on some form of evidence of deliverability. And then ED66 presents it right at the back end of the plan period. I don't know why there's been such a sudden shift in terms of the anticipated trajectory. The site's owned by Capital and Regional and Aviva investors, and again, I'm not aware that there's any statement of common ground or positive statement of intent from the landowners in terms of their ability or willingness to bring the site forward to any specific timescale. I think this plays into sort of bigger picture, sir, that the plan as a whole lacks contingency, housing number contingency that would allow some of these more aspirational sites to be accommodated, because if they aren't delivered to these timescales, sir, there's going to be a fundamental shortfall in housing delivery. With a lack of any meaningful contingency or safeguarding, one of these sites fails and the whole plan fails to deliver its housing numbers, it's already underachieving against the minimum standard method figures. And I think we're looking at big significant numbers here, 400 units, and you're being presented with very little evidence to show that this site will be delivered to either the timescale in ED31 or ED66.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mosley. We'll no doubt come back to that issue as we go through various other site allocations over the next couple of weeks, and bringing that all together at the housing land supply session in the final week. But I will give the council an final opportunity to comment on the points that have been raised. Thank you, Mr. Coyne.
Just to say, sir, that it has been moved back. We recognise it's it will be a difficult site. We've commissioned a major piece of work from which has got the lead consultants as we made that, supported by people like Cushman and Whitefield. And as I said, one of the more detailed elements of this that we'll be getting them to do over the coming months will be to look at those medium-term redevelopment options. That I don't think we'd really expect to sort of have a statement of common ground with an owner for a site that was at the back end of a trajectory of this length.
Sorry, Mr. Coyne, for the benefit of my note, Kushner and Wakefield, that they are commissioned to do the town centre. So we made that. Okay. There are no further points in relation to town centre sites. The agenda this morning also then looks at the Maidstone urban area covered by policy LPR SP2. My reading and understanding of the plan and the evidence before me is it largely takes forward existing 2017 allocations, although there are 3 proposed additional housing allocations that this plan would make within the urban area. And I think in terms of the policy itself, consistent with what the council set out at other sessions about kind of infrastructure to support growth within the borough, the council has put forward, I think this is an LPR sub 11, an amendment to criteria D, I think to include reference to Royal Engineers Road and Hermitage Lane. I think this is in terms of presumably transport infrastructure. Again, I'm just wondering whether this is necessary for soundness or whether there's something the council can do, whether those are matters of fact as kind of key roads, arterial routes within the town.
So if I can assist initially in terms of KCC's position, I dealt with a previous planning application for 172 units on that site. That was refused for reasons of design quality rather than principle. But for that number of units, KCC raised no objection to the impacts on the highway network.
Can I just clarify, is this the Springfield Tower? It's 366, okay. I'm just wondering whether, more generally in terms of policy LPR SP2, in terms of setting out the strategic framework for Maidstone urban area, as part of the council's proposed modifications, it's putting forward expanding criterion D4 of the policy to reference the A229 Royal Engineers Road and Hermitage Lane. I'm just wondering whether that's something that's strictly necessary for soundness or whether that's a change the council could make itself as a matter of fact or obviousness.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I would imagine this would have resulted from us negotiating with Kent County Council Highways in that regard. I think they had requested that additional clarity to ensure that it was clear for developers that this requirement was in place. So we've obviously put this in because it refers to us within policy itself a specific change as a potential main modification. However, we would be happy, obviously, if that was to just be referenced within the RJ, the introductory text, to clarify that as well.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking. I appreciate it is new text within the policy. I'm just wondering, in essence, what it practically means for the kind of the delivery. As my initial inclination was, this would be a minor modification that the council could make of its own volition, as matter of fact, as to key roads rather than as a main modification.
Yeah, I mean, it does just provide that little bit of extra detail, doesn't it, rather than actually setting a different course of direction within the policy. So I think so the council would be of that view as well. It's very specific.
I think more generally, in terms of the approach to Maidstone urban area, I'm mindful, Ms Davis for CPRE Kent, I think from reading your representations, I think the view is the council could make more of some of the opportunities that exist within the Maidstone urban area in terms of.
We don't have any specific site-by-site views. It's the overarching issue about the densities. But could I move on just to highlight a couple of the modifications that we were asking for you to take into consideration? So the SP2 is divided up into the urban area, the inner urban area and the outer urban area. And just to make the point again, all the SP1, 2 and 3, the strategy policies, we would like to see a cross-reference back to the density policy, HOU5, perhaps, after the yield is mentioned, density in accordance with the relevant policy. And it's at that point that we've got specific modifications that we were looking at with regard to the urban area. So I'm looking at point 2 and point 3 of LPR HOU5. I would say here that whether or not you agree with me, I do think there's an area for minor modification. I think there's some words missing. Point 2, sites within urban area, in the urban area. So I just think there needs to be some modification there. But the main modification that I wanted to flag up to you was in that inner urban area, so sites within 800 metres, easy walking distance to the town centre, that instead of what appears to be, I accept it says minimum in the introductory paragraph of the policy, but instead of what appears to be an absolute density of 75 dwellings per hectare, to raise that to 100 dwellings per hectare and to achieve no less than 75 dwellings per hectare. And similarly, in the outer urban area, but still within the urban boundary, just feel that the 35 dwellings per hectare is a very low density in, the key town, the county town of Maidstone, with, highly sustainable, as we've already discussed, and would like to see that raised to 50 dwellings per hectare, not less than 35 dwellings per hectare. Thank you.
I'm mindful we'll be picking up policy LPR HOU5 at the housing matter session in the final week, but I note the CPRE's position on that, so we'll undoubtedly come back to that. In terms of policy LPR SP2 itself, I'm trying to track back and remember whether there was a need to cross-reference Invicta Barracks within this policy as a site and an area, obviously within the Maidstone urban area, in terms of contributing to the overall supply and capacity within the urban area.
Thank you, sir. Yes, it's certainly the case that when we consider the urban area outside the immediate town centre, we certainly include Invicta Barracks within our calculations, as in fact we have done in our response to 6.12 as well. We make specific reference to Invicta there. So I would be happy to cross-reference that to the Invicta Barracks policy as well.
Thank you. I think it is a cross-reference. Obviously, LPR policy LPR SP5 B A B, right, first time. Okay. Obviously sets out its own strategic policy for that that strategic site. So I think it would be a straightforward cross-reference within policy LPR SP2. And in terms of the site allocations, the additional site allocations that then flow from that, as Mr. Mackey referred to a moment ago, Springfield Tower site 366 is obviously one of the larger potential sites. I mean, from what I can see, that site has now been cleared, but does it have a planning consent? Is it something where there's interest?
So no, the site doesn't have an extant planning consent. It was granted consent back in, I think, 2014 for 110 units. That permission lapsed in 2017. We received a planning application for 172 units, but as I mentioned, that previously that was refused on grounds of design rather than principle. There have been 2 pre-application meetings since, one with the party in the room that no longer has an interest, and the other with the council who does have an interest in the land, having acquired the site. The site has been cleared for a long time, with the exception of a tall library storage tower that sat there. That was removed last year for reasons of health and safety. It was the subject of trespass and vandalism, so with the agreement of the community, that was demolished. But we are in advanced pre-application discussions for a scheme on the site which the council intends to deliver.
I think in terms of modifications, the council's proposing an additional bullet point that any scheme on this site is designed to complement design improvements to the A229. Presumably this is, I'm mindful that site is very close to the roundabout that's also the point, currently the main point of entrance into the Invicta barracks site. So presumably the council is seeking to ensure that whatever happens here doesn't compromise cumulatively how those sites kind of come together.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we'll come on obviously to the transport and infrastructure side of things in later hearings, but Kent County Council will reference the sort of cumulative impacts along the A229 corridor, and what this does, it helps ensure that we're not stymieing the mitigations that may be necessary through adding this main modification.
Thank you. And then finally, from my perspective on the urban sites, Site 152, which is the former Royal British Legion Social Club site. I'm going off at a tangent here. Is that on the policies map? Not that I have any power to recommend modifications to the policy map.
So I don't think that one is, and that's just an oversight on our part.
Okay. I can't recommend changes to the policies map by a quirk of the rules and regulations, but what tends to happen is when the council consults on main modifications, it usually has a schedule of any allied or associated changes to the policies map, and this is probably just an administrative thing to add to that schedule so that people are clear where the site is.
So grateful to you for that point, and we will be ensuring that the policies map is updated accordingly. Thank you very much.
Are there any further comments or points people wish to raise on town centre sites, urban sites? No, in which case can I thank people for their contributions. I did say at the start I wanted to be clear with the council on kind of schedules of proposed main modifications and what aren't main modifications. I appreciate we've kind of been going through that as we've kind of moved along. I think what I would just say, for the avoidance of doubt, that the 2 proposed changes for Maidstone East and Maidstone Riverside that the council's put forward in its Matter 6 statement would be main modifications in terms of that clarification about moving away from comprehensive master planning to ensure sites can come forward perhaps in a more sort of flexible approach within sort of the overall frameworks for those sites. Clearly the changes to the site capacity figures would be main modifications as well. Within LPR sub 11, on page 4, the Council's put forward various modifications to LPR SP2. In my view, they would all be minor modifications that wouldn't need to be consulted on as main modifications. So they are things the Council, if it was so minded to do, could do of its own accord. In LPR sub 11 on page 36, the Council suggested some minor changing to the wording for Maidstone East. I think removing the reference to commuter for car parking, etc. I think those are all minor changes that the Council can do. I don't think I need to recommend those as necessary for soundness. As previously discussed, obviously changing the capacity for Maidstone West would be a main modification, as would be adding in an additional criterion to Site 151 for Moat Road. And similarly, the new transport bullet point for Springfield Road, I think again would be a main modification. I will clarify that in a separate note, but I just wanted to leave the room today hopefully reasonably clear on what are main or minor modifications. Obviously keep live the whole point around the housing land supply. That is something we will come back to once we've heard all the evidence on all the site allocations, and that will be picked up on Matter 8. So before I break for lunch, any further point, Mr. Edgerton?
Just a very quick point, sir, around the cross-reference of Invicta Barracks with an SP2. Is that you're happy with that being minor?
That may be something I need to check back in terms of our Invicta Barracks discussion as to whether that would be a main modification. If the Council can leave that with me, and I will clarify that in my note. Okay. Well, thank you again, everybody, for contributions this morning. I'll now bring this session of the examination hearings to a close. And I think we resume this afternoon at 2 o'clock for further discussion on proposed allocations on the edge of Maidstone. So I'll see people back in this room at 2 o'clock. Thank you.